I'm looking.
Should have blue shirt.
Hey, Marty. John and John. John. How are you? Marty, how you doing? I'm good. You look well. I'm coming to get this attendance that I don't I guess we should count on this.
A couple more minutes, folks.
You're back? Where's lunch? There he is.
Well, your call.
Yes.
No, sure we
Okay.
A special not a special DNA.
Hey, it's neat.
Oh, I got all the elites here.
All the heavy hitters.
That was true.
I know there's only one item on the agenda.
Yeah.
Follow the proper protocol. I didn't bring a copy. Does anybody have a copy of the agenda?
I do.
Oh, I guess I should have said it out loud, huh? Thank you. This is all I need.
Grab an extra copy.
It says it's attached.
That's all.
Third time's a charm.
Hey, what's going on, Gene? How you doing?
Okay, switch places.
Patrick.
No answer yet.
I guess, hey, can,
When did you call?
we need to call Colette.
Lunch.
Make sure the volume is turned up, I guess. Yeah, so far so good. That's cool. That didn't sound good.
It says 4 missed calls. Would you like me to hit call back?
No, we're making an outbound call to Colette.
Or shouldn't it be ringing?
Hey, Patrick,
Yes, sir.
can you, in your role as technology czar, could you please come over here and make this phone call for us? Make sure it's working properly?
1 second, just trying to make sure we're actually online.
What was talent? We can't make a phone call.
I'm just too lazy to get up over there. Give me this one last, please. Pat, you need a 9 to dial an outside line?
Just a 1.
All right, just
Just a one, yeah.
let's do it.
Try this at home.
Go.
443-791-7724.
There you go.
Colette, good afternoon. I won't go through, there's a cadre of people here. Well, the meeting's about ready to start, so Patrick, we good?
I am double checking.
Did you go into QNAP?
No, I took it right off.
Is that what they said before? Yeah, yeah, copy. No. Okay, don't worry about it, Ted's right next to
You
it.
appear to be good.
All right, I'll call the meeting to order. Please rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, everybody's aware of the meeting agenda. I will entertain a motion to accept the agenda as presented. Is there a second? Discussion, any requested changes to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the questions. All those in favor of accepting the agenda as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very good. President's remarks, none other than thank you everybody for for coming today. I think this is a first in a very important process about getting our finances back in order, organizing our environment in such a way, and using the advisory committee, which is what it was set up for, to help guide us through this entire budget process so that we can attack the next fiscal year in a more fiduciarily responsible manner. And I thank everybody for their input. Move to the next section, public comments. Seeing no public comments, I'll move to the next item on the agenda, and that is the only item on today's meeting agenda, and that's discussion of Budget and Finance Committee recommendations. I would like to turn it over to the...
Okay. I guess if we just go down one at a time, because I believe you all have a copy of this, right? There's a total of 10 on this page, and the last one we'll have to discuss, which is the timeline, all right? The Budget and Finance Committee under Resolution FO2, Section 2, is offering assistance to the GM and the board for the preparation of the 2018-19 budget preparation. So that's pretty standard. Historically, very historically, we used to actually meet with department heads one-on-one, but that's a long, long time ago, and that has long since passed. As GMs rotated around, some of them just had us back off, and we really didn't see much of the budget process until the initial proposal was put together. So the GMs worked with their own department heads and their own finance people to develop the budget, and that's generally how it's been. But we are available to help in the development of it from now until such time as it's published, okay? You just have to let us know what it is, what it is that you want us to be doing during the process. Okay. All right, item 2.
Can I stop there?
Yes. Oh, yeah, just wide open.
Just some housekeeping duties. This is not official board meetings, obviously a committee meeting. I want to make sure we're taking notes. Now, with Colette as the secretary being remote, can I ask for someone else to take minutes of this meeting so that we can record them properly?
I'll do it.
Ted, thank you. I just want to make sure that we've got all our ducks in a row when it comes to that kind of stuff.
The meeting
Okay.
being recorded?
Yes, it is.
Video cast?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Ted.
All right, item number 2. And most of these recommendations, by the way, are not brand new. They have been annually produced in some form or other. That each department should describe the method used to develop their budget. How did you develop it? These details, such as what metrics were used and what value the previous year's actual performance had on the development. So that should be understood by whoever's going to read the budget. How did you arrive at the thing? Because as you know, in the past, the revenues have been difficult to budget, and it's one of the few things that we don't control. We can control expenses very well, but the revenues are a little difficult, so it's always good to lean back on something and/or a good business plan. All right, item number 3. Absent an extremely detailed, reasonable, and well-documented approach for budgeting revenue greater than those achieved in the most recent past, amenity revenues should reflect no more than what was achieved in the most recent past. The justification here is that since these revenues were achieved and it is reasonable they should be achieved again. Which is really saying no wild guesses about what you anticipate next year unless there's some good sound judgment behind it. And the common, business plan is always a good thing to have. I'm sorry, by the way, like these seem to make common sense.
Perhaps the applicability of common sense is something we should really be thinking about.
Doug, may I? Just
Please,
a
slow
comment, just a comment to John Bailey's benefit, because he wasn't here last year, but I just want to comment that the committee last year, actually, when we went through the seminal process, was firmly against what was very aggressive revenue projections for public facilities. And they went on record That was when John Loyola was actually on the committee as chair, I believe, at that time. The committee was strongly against those revenue projections at the time, alerting the board and the staff, and they were overly aggressive, no solid business plan, etc. So I think we took their recommendation to heart, and some directors were concerned with those projected revenue, and I just wanted to recognize the committee for that previous year effort, so you're aware of that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Item number 4.
Doug, can I make a comment on item number 3?
Go ahead, please do, go ahead. And speak up, please.
Yes, yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You should be able to turn that up some more.
I realize that that is kind of a no-brainer recommendation, but I think we had some extraordinary factors last year contributing to the actual revenue. The operating costs were pretty similar to what was seen in the past, but last year we had that 20% unbudgeted discount in food and beverage at, for all of the amenities. And I think if we just use previous revenues at face value, we may be coming up with the wrong numbers. So I think we need to exercise caution in using last year's revenue figures for food and beverage in budgeting. And I think we also need to be avoid being overly optimistic about the impact on revenue in the food and beverage area based on new management changes. So I think we're going to have to look very closely at that when we do the actual budget. Thank you.
Gene?
Is there a possibility that we have available the gross revenues before the application of the 20% discount? Do we have that available in our numbers, John?
Is it possible to get that information?
Oh, sure, I'm sure. I thought it was in here. I couldn't.
Yes, you can get that.
Yeah, I thought it was in here.
So could we use that rather than post-discount revenue numbers?
You probably can if you did, but you also have to be careful with the beach club, because bear in mind, there was a dramatic increase in revenues predicated on extending the season and extending the hours during the season, which didn't materialize as anticipated. So those two subjects, I think the yacht club and the beach club, should have very close scrutiny as to going back into history, just what we have done over 3 or 4 years since we opened it. Right?
Oftentimes you can take a 3-year average, because that takes care of anomalies in there, and then you just keep moving that 3-year average forward and you get a pretty good, and if you get the growth, it doesn't grossly affect you the following year, or if you get a dip, it evens out over that period. So a lot of times on things like that, it's maybe going back on things that we had a really screwball year and looking at the previous 3 years as an average is one possibility.
Yeah, and that's actually something I was going to recommend. Ted said, and other people, I know people in the back too have given me feedback on that. But to answer Gene's question, the sales numbers are definitely there. Gross before the net 20%, that's broken out. Accounting definitely could give you that information. The 20% is broken out separate in other, so you can get that information.
That's just to echo that, I would like to see those numbers, because if you're talking about the anomaly as far as the revenue over a 3-year period, if we're looking at a 20% loss of revenue because of the discounts, we got to factor that in, so it doesn't, the last year numbers don't get skewed compared to 15 and 16 numbers.
My personal opinion, just forget about last year. It's an anomaly. It's so out of the norm of everything that we did in the past that it should be sort of set aside, and we look in the past beyond it. I mean, we can't ignore it, but it should be set aside because it's such an anomaly in terms of operational things that we have not done previously and how it impacted our revenues. So significant.
One of the things, I guess I might as well jump in with this right now, that I think about all the time. One of the things that I believe drives those revenue from the amenities numbers frequently, without maybe a plan back, and I'm just not talking 1 year, is that we start out frequently, at least in my experience here, we start out with The assessment's going to stay the same, it's going to go down $5, it's only going to go up $1. So what happens is, we have all these fixed costs in services, police, public works, maintenance, more or less fixed, unless we decide, we can do things a little differently there. So we have all these costs over here, we're deciding that the assessment's not going anywhere, except maybe 1%, down 1%, nowhere. So we end up with the amenities deciding that they're gonna, somehow they gotta throw off some money to keep that assessment where it is, and then we don't necessarily have the plan. And I don't think that's a one-year anomaly. That's been my experience in following the budget for however long I followed now. The process seems to start with where we want to end for the assessment, rather than starting, this is what the community needs to thrive, and then working toward that assessment.
Let's see, Gene, did you have your
I
hand
was just going to ask Cheryl, does your comment apply to the cost as well as the revenues?
Things were done differently last year in terms of the costs as well. So the consolidation of ordering in the food and beverage arena was a different way to approach that in the past. So yeah, that is different. And I just have real concerns about how much you place on what occurred last year, because it was just such a departure from what we had done.
And does that go beyond the fee-based amenities to all operations, in your opinion?
Well, it depends on what would be included in operations. So it would go beyond, yeah.
Just to add to last year debate, what interests me about last year is lessons learned, because we were collectively, we were aggressive with some numbers, revenue projections, changes in membership structures, and I think it will be good to look back and see what was learned from that, whether in fact some of those changes were valid and produced desirable results, while others were not. And I think that's where I'm coming from, not really to use it as a 3-year average, but really for me to understand if those changes were effective, and if not, what did we learn from those, and let's make sure we don't repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah, if I may, one of the areas, if you look at along the same lines, where fee structures were changed, say, for the beach club, okay, and with the intent of getting a result. And the question is, did it yield that result?
Exactly.
And so we have to look at, same thing, there were, the food and beverage operations were modified a little bit with the intent of yielding a result. Did it produce that result? And if not, I think that's where you use that year's data. But I would be, it's almost like the hybrid approach. You take all 3 years, look at the average plus the anomalies for this year, and you look at both of those and say, hey, go back and take the lessons learned and use that as we build the budget for the next fiscal year.
How would you summarize all these comments to budget guidance from the GM to the department?
Could I step back to what Doug said for a second before we summarize?
Sure,
When
go ahead.
we look at the impact of the fee structure change at the beach club parking, I think we also need to look at its impact on, if it's possible to look at this impact on food and beverage and swim revenues at that venue that may have changed as a result of the change in the beach club parking. I think if we just look at the parking, the fee was increased, so we're going to see an increase in revenue related to that fee increase. But that fee increase may have had an unexpected consequence in terms of the other aspects of revenue with that amenity. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if you wanted a summary. I would say to conservatively budget, understanding that last year had anomalies, perhaps both directions, and not to get too out in front of revenue based on a hope and a wish.
And you're sitting with enough experience going back far enough between the committee members, in your management team. You know, like they can go back and talk about 5, 6, 7 years ago without much trouble, and they can tell you what, presumably they can tell you what their problems were this year because of whatever changes were put in. Okay. All right, item number 4, full-time employees. We're recommending that you review the staffing by department for appropriateness of full-time employees or equivalent and salaries. And we think that you should use government/industry statistics for comparison. I know they exist out there, especially in the restaurant business. And recommend that dollars be budgeted to have an outside study performed for this comparison. Use this study to also determine the range of increase by department/position. We're suggesting budgeting a 3% salary increase and awarded on a merit basis as opposed to across the board. It seems like the staffing expenses have been going up year to year to year. Now, part of that is, I believe that there's a minimum wage change coming in Maryland, which is going to impact not only the minimum wage employees, but everybody above them, because once you bump the minimum wage up, everybody else proportionally gets bumped up. And another major expense on employees, of course, is the benefits. And they're tough to control, but you have to watch the benefits.
Well, what made the point several times that the benefits proportionally by department are highly variable. Well, there may be very real reasons for that, but it's been somewhat difficult for us to get that information.
Yeah. Well, a lot of places have part-time employees, so they're not even eligible for benefits or don't partake of it, versus other departments are mostly full-time and maybe even younger people with families, and maybe that's why it's proportional. But, you know, I mean, like there are some standards across the board that we have to have access to, and I'm sure you have from previous experience, you know. But anyway, we're recommending that.
Are you looking at a pay study?
I'd like to comment on the merit basis increases in salary. I just want to make sure that we carefully define what merit means. And I would think that it would be net operating performance to budget for department heads. But, you know, certainly going down the line in each department, I think we need to make it very clear, you know, what performance standards need to be met in order to qualify for that merit increase. Thank you.
This leads to number 5.
Yeah, let me add to what Colette was saying. Many of us come from the private sector. I would like to see the committee maybe review this recommendation and come back to the board and the GM with a slightly modified suggestion. And where I'm going with this is there are full-time hourly employees and there are full-time salaried employees. Private sector, where I was, salary employees basically had a year-end bonuses. Not very often did we see a flat percentage of salary increase. It's typically defined by individual year-end accomplishments or departmental accomplishments or corporate accomplishments. That is very appropriate for salaried employees. I would be comfortable with a flat percentage, whether it's based on COLA or consumer price index or whatever you want to use, that's used in a marketplace for hourly employees. But I would not necessarily favor this approach for salaried employees, whether they're department heads or senior management staff. I have seen very different performance and year-end bonus structures for that kind of status.
Well, I suppose you could try to build in a bonus structure for your senior management if you want, you know, as opposed to salary increases. I don't know. I mean, the bonuses are usually one time.
Exactly, and that's where I'm headed with this. You know, you increase salary on a regular basis. We're basically continuing to deal with the payroll increases year to year. And if you look at the averages over the past several years, I mean, our payroll expenses have gone up pretty much.
You're somewhat leading into the next item, item number 5 here, where we have recommended for probably the 3rd or 4th year, that a human resources specialist position be filled as soon as possible. We believe an HR person would be valuable in avoiding lawsuits and establishing a benefits program in line with comparable metrics. And that can either be an employee or a consulting firm, if you like, for starters. But that's the kind of a role that that person would come up with, would be options on benefits and options on salary.
So, yeah, the good thing there is that the last board meeting, you know, we passed a motion to go ahead and fund and fill that position.
Oh, there you go.
Let me hop back to the full-time equivalents. I think, you know, you can use industry standards in yacht club and food service and stuff like that, but I also think you need to look at mission. And one of the big things that everybody has complained about in Ocean Pines is that when we do something, we don't maintain it, and we don't keep it, and it falls into disrepair, and then we're into this argument, do we replace, and we didn't fix this up. So I think as part of looking at it, in particular in Public Works, is what is the mission? What is it going to take care of it? Because if you've got, you go down there and you look right now, you've got one HVAC guy, one plumber, one electrician, and one there servicing this whole thing. Do we have to add people? Maybe not. Maybe we outsource, you know, coming in once a year with a HVAC company under a contract to, you know, go through everything once. But I think, so I don't want to get, I want to also make sure we're looking at mission, because it does no good not to have the right number of people in Public Works and then have everybody complaining, hey, they haven't painted this, they haven't taken care of that, and so we're spending more money in the long run. So I think making sure we complete the mission, and it varies. I mean, food and beverage, there are percentages, but I think that's part of what you have to look at is what is the mission there as well.
A mission versus a business plan is basically the same thing, with the mission being for the non-income producing departments, units. Yeah.
Right, well, the mission would indicate, okay, the government standard is 8 FTEs for 1,000 acres or whatever, but we want to do a little better than the government standard, so we're going to have 10 FTEs for the 1,000 acres. So, which is, you know.
Two hands there, first John and then Gene.
So, Gene Weber. So, getting back, I'm very glad, very happy to hear that the board has approved an HR position. I think it's mandatory. With that said, and continuing on that, it's very important that part of this process, whether it needs to be allocated or whatever money, the job descriptions need to be prepared or updated at a minimum for this association, for the workers here. Processes and/or controls need to be updated, if not prepared.
What do you mean by process and control?
So controls, so if we have a situation, let's just take petty cash. We have petty cash in every location. If we even decide to do that, if they decide to do that, there needs to be documented controls.
Financial controls.
Financial controls on how that works. And that needs to be reviewed with everybody. That's mandatory. The job descriptions, especially with the situation we had this past year, which was change or whatever, but even without that, if we don't have job descriptions, you can have an HR person, you're going to have problems. And that's all part of it, and I agree, I think it was Slobodan said about it. I see here we're recommending a 3% increase, but again, just like we're saying everything else, that should be a metric that should be reviewed as part of the HR person, should be able to get the information on that. You know, it should be merit-based, the performance reviews, I know we have them. That should all be part of the process. And just to backtrack on this a little bit more while I'm going on it, we talked about, and I heard some good things there, where it's a bottom-up plan. We're talking about a budget as opposed to it almost sounding like a plug number that we get to the balancing type of assessment, which I hope it's not the case. But it should be bottom-up, it should be based upon prior years. You're right, certain things did happen last year, whether it was the revenue and/or the expenses, but there's still history there. But that all has to be taken into account. So I heard all that, that's all good things. That said, what I'd like to add to that, which kind of just needs to be said, we have a budget. Who's preparing this budget? The budget is owned by whom? By the GM? That's fine. every department head has input to it. It's my recommendation that every department head should be signing off on those budgets that they have. They should understand the budgets, if any changes are made to them. There should be, if there's a stretch in there, what's the stretch or not a stretch, there should be accountability. Nobody should just be handed a budget, and then if they don't meet it, then what do we do? Well, it's not their budget, they don't even know what's in the budget. It's mandatory, and this is all, and I know it'll happen this year, there's not even a doubt in my mind, I'm sorry I'm bringing it up, it needs to be said. Every department head should sign off on those budgets, and if they don't agree on something, that should be noted. And it all should be part of the process, all tied into job descriptions as well as performance. And there should be some type of review over a period of time, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever, on where they're at. And especially if something isn't meeting budget. This is standard. And then when we say about what did we learn last year, what lessons learned, well, if we didn't learn them by now, what happened and what didn't happen, well, I hope we know. If somebody doesn't, I'd be glad to sit down with them afterwards.
And I think one thing you said that's important is if we're not including something in the budget, what the impact is, okay? Because for instance, if we've only got $30,000 in a year for labor, material, equipment, and replacing a piping for drainage, think about that, okay? Are we making any progress on infrastructure that's 25 or 30 years old? The answer is no, okay? So there needs to be that, hey, if you're not going to put it in, remember this when somebody's screaming bloody murder 6 months from now about us not doing it, that this was a choice, not we didn't look at it.
And then, oh, sorry, I just have one.
Good, all right, John.
So, and again, I would notice, I was on the other side of the table, Jim brought it up, John brought it up, I'd probably be saying the same thing they did, maybe I just have a little more insight now. With the benefits, they do look high every time we look at it from the budget and finance department. But it's not that, oh, there might be a mistake in that department, or why is it so high? We, as an association, those are the benefits that we're giving. That is the cost. Now, obviously, depending on the type or, the individuals in the department, that benefit number may be higher. It may be higher depending on the situation of the person, as well as, somebody else mentioned, whether we have part-time or full-time. There's a difference there with the benefits. Now, keep in mind, when you do the budget, if you have somebody or X amount of people in your department, that you have them down as part-time, they may not qualify for benefits. But then if something else spirals out of control or some type of situation, and then they get to another level, then benefits are kicking in, and that may be something that you don't have in the budget, and that's why you would have that difference. So again, I understand what we're seeing, but the thing is this is what we've elected. This is the type of benefits that we're giving our employees, and that's fine. But there is a cost to it. They are very good. And that's where it is, and maybe that's, again, with the HR, but that's why you're seeing that. Those are the reasons.
Gene?
Sticking with item 4, to piggyback on what Ted said about maintenance costs on acquisitions, it's been my observation that Ocean Pines never gives life cycle costs. They only focus in on the acquisition cost. And that is not all you're going to spend on that asset. And so I would like to propose that any new capital, meaning something that didn't functionally exist before, not only be thoroughly justified, why we need it now and didn't need it in the past 50 years, but also contain the life cycle costs, the impact on operating and maintenance costs. And secondly, my
20%.
My theory, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
My theory on budget guidance is that the more specific we get, the better end product we'll get as far as following the budget guidance. And to the extent that since John, O'Connor and I, and others that have been around for a while have followed the budget, year after year after year, food and beverage labor costs are budgeted at almost 50%, and the standard is 30%, and then we say, oh my God, why can't we make a profit? Somewhere along the line, Ocean Pines has got to get real and issue guidance that says food and beverage labor costs won't exceed 30% of estimated revenue. we can't continue down the road budgeting 45–50% labor costs, because we leave no room for profit. The same way with food costs, we're way higher in the standards. So at least on food and beverage, I'd like to see us specific rather than generalize about what we expect to see.
John?
Okay. Item number 6, it was touched on a little earlier. It was at our recommendation that you centralize purchasing across departments predicated on saving money by having one general contract with a vendor. And that's what we had recommended, and you did it. And I presume that we got better prices for the goods and services. But what needs to be refined is the actual delivery to the location where the goods are needed. I know, as example, Returns Grill ran out of whatever, beer, food, because they couldn't get delivery in time. I don't know what experience the Beach Club had. So that it's one thing to have a contract, but you can pinpoint, I want the delivery to the beach club or to the golf course or to the yacht club, as opposed to, I believe it all now comes to the yacht club and then gets dispersed out. And also that you should be able to provide your managers with an ability to call a vendor directly if they have an emergency. I need something right away because I just ran out of, I had a great day today and I ran out of hamburgers or whatever, but you know.
Well, one of the concerns this year, John, was the fact that the material, the needs existed at the yacht club, for example, but they couldn't get delivery to the Turn Grill, and maybe they had the same problem at Beach Club, I don't know. But that seemed to be one of the issues. The central distribution, central purchasing, fine, the central distribution didn't work because communications or somebody wasn't responsible or whatever, they couldn't get the stuff from where it was to where it was needed. I mean, the Turn Grill, which many of us are familiar with, I mean, running out of beer, you know, on a hot summer day, and it's sitting down at the yacht club and couldn't get it delivered.
Anyway, so I guess that's something you'll have to address when you settle in with whatever's going on.
Forgive me for not knowing the answer already, but did we actually achieve better pricing?
And then that's the question.
Good question.
I mean, at a level that's worth pursuing.
That's worth the headaches, absolutely, yeah.
The food costs are still pretty high, right?
Okay. Item number 7. The capital budget should be presented separate from the operating budget and be structured in a rolling, multi-year format that includes budgeted but unexpended capital items from prior years. All right, now that's something that never really has been done, I don't believe. Any request for new or replacement capital expenditures should include dollars and the dollars to be expended and the rationale for why it's needed, along with an ROI or return on investment calculation. If we spend this money, what's the benefit to us? All right? And we recommended in this document that the capital threshold move from 1,000 to 3,000. We added or more, and I believe you recently just put it up to 5,000, right? And then that's fine, you know. Like you don't want to capitalize a small amounts of money, all right? All right, and variances should have proper explanations and supporting details. No item should be part of the capital budget that does not meet that criteria. B&F committee will include a review to ensure proper oversight with periodic review and follow-up of the capital budget, which we do, as you know, on a monthly basis. We meet and we go through all the financials, including the capital expenditures and all, and reserves and et cetera. And from that, when necessary, we have recommendations that get back to the board of what to do. But that's kind of important on this capital because it really has been somewhat neglected as a specific item.
So I want to touch on that because, you know, I really didn't speak up prior to, in previous budget prep environments where, you know, in my real life job, I'm used to having capital as a separate budget and operational. The other thing we always look at is, and it goes back to Gene's point, is if I got a life cycle, you know, I spend $100, but 10% over the next 5 years, and I need to know that over the next 5 years, I have to add that to my operating budget for maintenance costs. So I don't know how we're tracking that because that's a very, very good point. You know, you may, you know, one time cash out of pocket, you know, purchase an acquisition, realizes for the next 10 years is gonna cost you some percentage of that acquisition cost, and, you know, with the number of assets that we have, that could turn into a, you know, sort of a, you know, a pretty big number. You know, we don't, you know, wanna make sure we collect that, and I think having a separate capital budget allows us to identify the things that are procured in that particular fiscal year as another tracking mechanism for budget prep for the, you know, subsequent fiscal years. So I'm big on that, but, sorry, Cheryl had her hand up first, Cheryl and then Gene.
I have a question about this rolling capital, and as Pat knows, I have a problem with if you budget a capital purchase in this year, as has been done in the past, and then that didn't occur, that a purchase didn't occur. I have a problem with that just rolling over into the next year. I say, if you didn't spend that money that was allocated capital budget for that, you gotta ask for it again in the next year. That doesn't automatically roll over. Now, that's different than I start a project and it can't be completed in that year. Then yes, obviously, that's gonna roll over. But I have a problem with, because that has happened in the past. The bathrooms out here was a perfect example of that, which is where I learned about that and had an objection with it. That sat in a budget for several years and never got started and just rolled over into the next year. And I have a problem with that. I feel like if you plan that and it's not spent, you didn't buy it, start over next year and you have to justify it again in the next budget.
If you didn't need it last year, how do you know you're gonna get it next year, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, in my mind, the rolling capital budget, which I'm in favor of, does not preclude that second year approval process again. I mean, you just don't automatically roll it over. It's just that you have a plan. The main thing is the go forward plan in that. That you have a plan when you do this year, I'm going to do next year and next year and next year as much as you can. And that goes back to a capital improvement plan, et cetera. But I don't in any, I mean, I am, you know, I want that rolling capital plan for the future, but not in any way preclude that approval process again.
I think what,
You know, it has to be approved again and justified again. So I don't think a rolling capital takes it.
Well, rolling to me says.
Well, I know, but maybe it's the wrong verb. Maybe it's the wrong verb.
Point of clarification, I'm asking this as a question, is that, you know, if we approve the capital purchase in the budget, all right, that affects the assessment, all right?
Right.
So therefore, the
Well,
expectation.
the new.
All right, I'm saying new
Directly.
capital. So the expectation of the membership would be, hey, that new capital project cost me $7 out of my
Right.
assessment, okay? If it doesn't get done, okay, and then, you know, we don't, you know, we have to start from scratch again. If I'm sort of a disgruntled association member, I'm going, wait a minute, where's the $7 that I put in for that particular capital asset? And we're scrambling to figure out what. So I agree with the rolling one, but I also agree that this shouldn't be automatic because we got to justify, we do have to have that go forward plan. The question I have is, after all that is, so if you do a go forward, and that automatically rolls from, you know, the previous fiscal year into the current fiscal year, how does that affect the assessment, is my question.
It's
How does
not-
that
Well,
capital?
the whole new capital is a whole different question there. That's never been raised, that's a whole different question. If
Okay.
we don't spend the new capital, do we have $5 to give back?
Yeah,
That's a
that-
whole different
yeah,
question.
that's my
from-
question, yeah.
And the rolling idea, like I said, it's really more of I'm not gonna use the word rolling anymore. A 5-year capital plan to accompany the budget. So we have a sense that in 2 or 3 years, whatever the thing is, we're gonna need to totally renovate the admin building or whatever, but we're gonna need to buy 5 trucks in year 5. That's more what I had in mind with the long-term capital
You're
plan.
really talking about taking the reserve plan
And
and
using
that
it as a guide.
as a guide to be able to build what we're gonna have to do at certain periods of
Right.
time, knowing some of it will drop off and that some new capital will come in. at some point.
And I mean, at any given year, you look at the prior year capital and you think, oh my God, I wanted to buy that truck, and it's April 30 or whatever it is. So, you know, I think rolling has been used. I think more the 5-year plan is probably a better terminology.
Gene?
First of all, the way Ocean Pines has historically budgeted capital is by 1 year, blind to whatever's going to happen next year. They do 1 year, blind to what's going to happen the next year. Do 1 year, blind, and I think this tool would help us. It's not necessarily cast in stone that you are going to spend it, but it's a tool to give us some idea of what's ahead in the future, our best thoughts as to what's ahead in the future. This organization cannot keep capital budgeting on a year-to-year basis and not know what the next year's bringing. Secondly, this is my area of expertise anyway, but capital budgeting. We have an area of whether in this guideline that will affect the budget as to whether or not roads are going to be depreciated and funded. I mean, they are going to be depreciated, but is the depreciation going to be funded? That's a decision that will affect the assessments amount. Third, there is a hidden pit of snakes that we have to be very careful of when we look at the budget for reserves this year, and that is the bulkhead reserve. All the way up until about 2 years ago, bulkheads were budgeted almost on a pay-as-you-go basis with a little left over in case you had emergency destruction of a bulkhead during a storm or something. But it was on a pay-as-you-go basis, and normally the spending equaled roughly the income, which was about $800,000 a year, and the budgeting, the expenditures were about $700,000 a year. In the fiscal year that ended April 30th, we spent $69,000 and collected $825,000 and had a 1.3 or 1.6 reserve balance. As of this most recent statement, it's 2.6. We collected another $825,000 in bulkhead fees. We have so far cumulatively spent $38,000. All this without any plan as to what we're going to do with bulkheads. Last year, during the budget review process, many bulkhead owners got up and stated they were upset that Ocean Pine continued to collect these amounts. And if they said that last year, and at the rate we're spending this year, they're going to be twice as loud and twice as vociferous about it. You can't charge us more when you don't have a plan and you're not spending what we're giving you in the first place. So that is something that, as a guideline, will have to be well thought out as to what you're going to do with those bulkhead reserves.
I think I can briefly address what's happening on that. As you know, we've gone back and forth. We're very close on a contract. It's on Friday's agenda to do the emergency work that needs to be done. But the board is actually going to receive a presentation in November, and JB and his team are working on a replacement plan that actually gets us back in so that we can then justify
That's
what
all
we
we
need.
need. We need justification to give to the homeowners, however way to do it.
His team is going to make a presentation so that everybody understands what we're doing going forward.
So I'm saying it's imperative to have the justification for the new assessments if you're going to. Otherwise, it's not going to be accepted. It's not going to be very well accepted.
All right, Gene, thanks for the lead into number 8 on the roads. We're recommending that you've got to look at the roads because the state has taken away all your funds, and the only funding for the road replacement now is from the casino funds, and they're unpredictable. Okay? And O'Malley got rid of whatever was there for the gasoline tax, so that's gone. So you really don't have much money coming in covering your roads. You may have to consider something adding to the assessments to cover the depreciation on the roads.
Well, one question I have, where did the $300,000 go last year? Did that go to the general thing and not to the roads?
We didn't have a, right.
Yes.
Okay, and that really, if I'm correct, when we went and got it, that money needed to go to infrastructure, which was roads.
casino
So
money.
I think one of the big things
Yeah, 'cause I
right
think
now
there's
would be that
150.
money needs, and I'm in agreement, and I think the reserve committee is in agreement, we need to do something with roads as well. But I think that 300,000 has to go back to roads, because that's the only money that is coming in currently, depending on what happens in this budget.
Did you-
But
what was your first
we used
question?
Where-
it for the bridges, so it went
Okay, we
into
used it for the
infrastructure.
bridges,
Yeah,
okay. But
yeah.
we-
And the bridges are charged.
Under the regular.
They're not charged to
Right.
roads.
Right.
It went into the bridges and that is infrastructure, so there
Okay.
was no problem.
It's just charged in a different place.
Although we've recommended that roads and bridges be put together.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Ted, are you talking about the casino fund?
Yeah.
And how they're accounted for?
Yeah, well, I was wondering where they went last year, and I've got the explanation, they went to bridges.
They
Okay,
first don't even go into reserves at all. The first, the money goes in on a balance sheet account, right, John? And then it's moved from that
Yes.
Two,
They
yeah.
wind up in reserve.
but it winds up in
In a reserve.
it should wind up in the roads and bridges reserve in the future. Okay.
So there is no special escrow account where the money is kept separate from the general reserve fund?
It doesn't have to be a separate escrow, we just,
Track it.
You
Yeah,
have the-
we
you have
just
the
name
bulkhead
and track
separate,
it.
you have the roads separate,
Right.
and then you just have the general. We were told to collapse everything into general fund.
So how does that work from an independent auditing perspective, especially with
Well,
us having
I
to,
understand what you, go ahead, I'm sorry.
okay, but you
No,
have.
if something's earmarked, then, right, if you have something
Yeah.
that's earmarked, then obviously we don't necessarily have that. So it kind of worked. But we've gone two different ways, where we come one year and everybody wants everything broken out on the reserve, and other times it's just put it all into general. As long as something's not earmarked, whether it's a donation or something like that, which I think you're saying, then yes, it has to be earmarked specifically for that.
That's why my concern is because those funds have to be spent
Right.
specifically
Right.
for infrastructure, and the independent or external audit,
Right.
if one is imposed, we gotta be able to produce the books that show there was no coming on of funds.
Right.
Right now, we're okay. To answer your question, though, we're okay.
When you talk about escrow, are you talking about the cash? Are you saying
No,
the cash should be in reserve?
Basically, what you're saying is if we spent $280,000, if we had that 300 in roads next year and spent 280, we should still have 20 in it at the end of the
Right,
year.
and then the board would just,
and
Basically,
there is,
basically.
yeah,
exactly.
there's a 500,000 in there at September, so it's accrued. Now, whether things are charged against it properly.
I think you have the same problem with roads that you have with bulkheads. I'm not sure there's a schedule of roads renewal.
There
I know
was once a
There was at
schedule,
one time, and then someone said that
and
the
then we
life of
stopped
the roads
doing
is,
roads.
Right.
Yeah.
and the life of the roads is longer than what was originally anticipated or something, but yeah.
Yeah, we'll make redoing that whole, the road study, if you would, of conditions, and then prioritizing it off of that.
Right,
And
exactly.
then creating your estimates.
If, one other comment on reserve, if the reserve committee or if the board is going to approve some kind of number as the ending balance that has to be achieved at the end of the budget year for reserves, that dramatically changes how we do the budget. Because in the past, we have always said spending does not affect assessments. But if you have to hit an ending balance after everything is done, then spending will affect, for the first time, spending out of the reserves will affect assessment.
Well, yeah, solely on the basis of whenever they finish that reserve study and they determine what level they anticipate they're going to need, then you're absolutely right.
It's a different scenario, what level they want to end up with at the end of the year.
Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about. The reserve study is primarily going to say you should be targeting X percentage of something to have a balance there, and you should accrue it over the time frame. And you're right. If you spend, if you're going to establish the end reserve amount, it affects the assessment because you've got to collect the dollars. If you're going to spend money out of reserves faster than what you anticipated, it affects the assessment because you've got to replenish it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, to say that the spending out of replacement reserves doesn't affect the assessment, is not completely accurate, because the only way the money gets into replacement reserves is from the assessment.
But now,
Yeah, but he's saying something, Gene, I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
he's saying something a little different.
Mhm.
Agree with that, and he agrees with that too, but just make your point again, because it is something different.
it is different. Our ending balance in all the reserves happened to be whatever the number was when you put in the beginning balance plus the contribution minus the spending. That was your ending balance. Good. That's why that number looks nice. But now you're saying when you take the beginning balance plus the contribution minus the spending, you better hit this number. Then spending will affect assessment, because, or contributions, I'll say.
Yeah.
Contribution, you're either going to lower or raise it. So that, in that regard, spending would affect contributions. You're going to have to adjust, you're going to have to keep doing the math until you come down to that, with contribution, until you come down to that target number. And so for the first time in the history of Ocean Pine, this will change the way we do assessments versus the reserves.
Oh, JB.
Totally lost my thought. That was a couple minutes ago. So as part of the reserve study, working with Doug Green and the DMA, have we set that minimum balance yet at all?
No,
We
no,
haven't?
no.
And we've never done that?
No, as
No.
far as I know, they are,
No.
they haven't done any of that
Where
yet.
it sits right now is, and Marty, correct me if I'm wrong, they are going back and taking and getting, updating the asset list based on what we have and we haven't done.
Okay.
And they are putting roads and bridges together, golf, regular, and what's the last one? There's
Well,
four.
they've taken out a couple things.
Bulkheads, yeah, so, but just doing that right off the bat, and then coming back to us with those numbers. But we have not attacked at all the hard part of the nut. You know, where do you think you need to be? And that varies depending on what you want to do, and.
So we haven't set a minimum balance
No.
to keep in the replacement
No.
capital
No.
reserve
No.
of
No, never.
$750,000 or $1 million, $1.5 million, two,
No, I
whatever.
mean,
We haven't
So
done
what
that.
we-
Depends on how
historically,
you
I-
do reserves, that could be 0 or 100 grand or $1 million.
Right.
Historically, I think the
But
ending,
what's the community comfortable with?
historically, I think the ending balance has been around $2 million.
$1.5 million to $2 million.
$1.5 million to
Always
$2 million.
been. And it just happens.
Always at the end of the
it happens
fiscal
by
year.
luck, not by plan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, it needs to be planned.
And you can't, because the new people will look at what the old people did, and they said, well, the old people had $2 million balance, we better do the same thing. Well, that's a great plan.
Gene, are you making a recommendation that we should target an ending balance?
Well, I'm saying whatever the recommendation from the reserve task force is, the board is gonna have to approve.
Okay, all right.
We'll make a decision.
We'll make a decision, and based on that, you're gonna have to have some
Yes.
kind of
Okay.
ending balance. And if you do all that, and you say we need these ending balances going forward, then it will affect the contributions.
Okay, good, thank you. John?
All right, we on to number 9. For presentation and analysis purposes, develop fiscal year budget reporting with the following. Budget versus the current actual. Prior year budget, variances, prior year actual, I don't know if it says that in there, and the effect on the assessment. Any department revenue or expense increase or decrease of 5% or $5,000, whichever is less, requires justification. Relevant objective performance metrics should be used in documenting expenses and revenues showing improvement when needed. There should be a total schedule year over year for major expenses. Historically, things have been reported as comparison to budget for the current year. Right? Well, after we've had this discussion already about the budget preparation, it's not really that good a comparison as opposed to year over year actuals. All right, so, I mean, like we are, recently, like the monthly report comes out with last year to date, so you at least have some comparison to go to. And that also is better for looking at it and understanding, do I have to make any adjustments in mid-year? If I'm having a problem, somebody got to make an adjustment. If you don't have the revenues, and someone's got to look at the expenses, All right, or if you're exceeding your revenues, then, you know, like maybe you want to adjust your expenses, or you want to figure out why, et cetera, especially if it's in like things, you know, if one restaurant's exceeding its revenues and the other one isn't, maybe we can exchange ideas here, you know, find out what's going on. So it's important, and again, every month, this committee meets and goes in detail with the report that you get, and we give recommendations via our representative back to the board, and we try to meet, obviously, before the board meeting, but we have to wait till the numbers are available. Currently now, I think it's what, 13 work days before we get it, so we've had to move our meetings to the fourth Wednesday, which is opposed to the third, because that usually comes before the 13th workday. All right, so hopefully the project of looking at the accounting systems and the back office stuff will improve that 13-day schedule. When that all gets implemented, make it a little easier for everybody. Okay. Any questions on that one? Okay, John.
Well, actually, I just added in there, because you just mentioned about a financial system, and I know I've heard different situations on that, and I'm not sure where we are on that. Is that something that's being considered for this budget at this time? That we're planning on that for the next fiscal year, to put in a new financial system?
So you're putting me on the spot, so I'll give you the pat answer. So the answer is, we had our first meeting with JB regarding where the technology work group stands, all the historical reference and information that's gathered from interviews with department heads and, you know, assessments of some of the software, everything. So give it time to bake. You've got a meeting with a couple of your guys, Len and Pat, to discuss a couple of more things. I can answer that question probably in the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
Okay, so it's kind of, you know, TBD, I guess, at this point.
And to be honest with you, that was just my lead into what I was going to talk about. Just, you know, believe me, I'm not looking for an answer on that right now, and right, that should evolve, or you need to look at more. But I was going to say, when I heard John talk about a system, if there is a system that needs to be looked at and needs to be identified in this budget, is the point of sale system. That's what I really was getting at, the financial system, whatever, but the point of sale system needs to be.
For our previous discussions, I think we were aware of that as well.
Okay, so that is something that would be part of this budget?
Do I have to wait?
No.
That would be part of this budget, or?
Well, JB, you want to?
I just said, do I have to wait?
Oh, you can.
I said, no, do I have to wait on a new point POS system?
No.
I don't know that we would wait till the next cycle.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, hold on, Cheryl.
I just want to add to what Doug said, John. We were ready to do on-site demos, and then we had a change. And so we're gearing back up to do that again, and we will invite you. I don't have my calendar, so I don't know the date.
She's reached out to them, and they're deciding on the date.
But it's going to be between Thanksgiving and December, so we want you to be a part of that if you're available when we do those. Because I know you were.
JB, definitely, absolutely.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
Have to have somebody to blame at the time.
Think about that.
Wait a minute, that's not how you get volunteers, okay? You talk them up and you get them involved, come on. Simple stuff here, guys, slow it down, please.
Yeah, I just have a one question for the group. From my perspective as an individual director, I would like to see the group really come to the board with assessment of benefits versus, you know, disadvantages of going with acquisition of the financial management system versus basically, you know, getting something, a cloud-based back office application service. And I'd like to know, I think she's, you probably can hang up, because she's got a 3 o'clock that's starting now, and I think Colette is finished.
And I got a hard stop in 10 minutes, so.
So is the committee going to give the board you know, the advantages, disadvantages of going with a cloud-based service back office?
I will absolutely make the commitment on behalf of the rest of the members that it's not a decision-making body anyway, it's an information-gathering body. The idea is to present information from, you know, that's gathered from staff to JB, and then if it makes sense and it feels like it needs to matriculate, then it goes to the board and say, here's the background information, and you know, can a decision be made going forward based on a recommendation from the GM?
The reason I'm asking this is back to John Barnes about budget for next year. If you're obviously, getting a service, outsourcing service, it's a monthly expenditure as opposed to capital acquisition.
Right.
So from a budgeting point of view, it makes a huge difference.
So-
That's the point I'm trying to make.
So-
data storage, right?
No, slow it, when you're talking
Back
about, we
office, financial
actually
system.
almost like, not leased, but more or less had an outside provider providing the service, which included the software.
Called SAS.
No, I hear you.
Wasn't that kind of what we were doing with BDK?
I know what he's talking about. Actually.
Well, I know what he's talking about, but it was kind of.
No, BDK was
I am.
somebody coming in servicing the system we have here that he's talking about, which actually I think should be part of the process too.
Right.
Anyway, I agree with you on that. I mean, that'd be up to the committee, but I understand what you're asking for. It definitely should be looked
It's
at.
a difference in budgeting.
Definitely should be looked at, but I'll bring that up to them.
I don't want to take the meeting in another direction, but that's actually been part of our ongoing conversation. You know, premise-based, cloud-based, subscription-based, SaaS, you do it, how does it affect the budget? Do we want to do capital acquisition and long-term maintenance? All of those things factor into it.
That's the point. Definitely should be looked at.
John?
Okay, last item on the thing is that the committee and the board should develop a timeline for the budget development review, which is basically what we're doing here. What's happened in the past is, by September, the B&F committee should have these recommendations to you. I think we're a little late this year, it will be out until you're late in September. All right. And then the board should meet with the committee as we're doing now, and in fact, then be able to turn it over to the general manager for the preparation of the budget. And that also should be done by the end of September. So again, we're about a month behind schedule normally. Now, what goes on after that is general manager should have his first draft of the budget presented to the B&F committee and the board before the holidays, before the Christmas holidays. So I've just put down arbitrarily the Friday of 12/22/17, all right? December 12th, or in that general area. All right. And what happens is in January, B&F committee has a detailed review with the general manager and the department heads. And that is usually a 2 or 3 day session. I believe you folks have tentatively scheduled that for the week of January 8th, I believe. And it's kind of flexible, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday if needed. But as a result of that, and when I say detailed, we have the GM, we have the managers come in on schedule, he schedules them as they're coming through, and we'll go down the line items in the budget by department, as well as capital or whatever else is to it. And, it's been helpful for us, it's been helpful for the board, it's been helpful for the department heads and the GM too, because they get a feel for what specifically people have in mind, at least what the committee is looking at and concerned about. And it's a cross-section on the committee. So I know in the past it's helped the GM and the department heads, all right? It also means that we know that they're involved in the preparation of it leading up to the responsibility, that they're not given a budget and say, here, do this. In the past, they've developed it along with the GM and the accounting people, I'm sure they are. Right? That takes about a week.
Can I just add, first of all, it's an excellent process, and it's been here for a while. Another piece to that is it's also there for transparency for the association to be there and be a part of it.
Yeah.
A big part of that is for the transparency.
Yeah. It's actually open to the public, and it's a committee meeting specifically, but most of the board members go in attendance because it becomes a learning cycle for them. Most of the board members, because you've seen the book, it's whatever it is, 4 or 5 inches thick. Or I'm exaggerating, it's probably only 30 inches thick. But it takes time to go through and digest it, which is why, like, I can use it New Year's Eve, because you stay away from the ball, And then by the end of that week, usually that Friday, we'll have a written document to the board which summarizes what those 2 or 3 days have brought about, okay? Then at the GM, make the revisions or do whatever is appropriate and propose the budget to the OPA board at your January meeting, okay? This is according to resolution FO2, all right? He's got to do it within 90 days of the time frame, of course, which is May 1, so that's why you get it at your January meeting. And then the board has to present the budget to the membership prior to its approval, usually at the February board meeting, if not a special meeting for that. And that must be approved by the board by February 28th, or the last day of February, according to resolution FO2, again, 60 days before it's effective. And that's the general timeline that goes on with this. So I just throw the dates in there, you know, like if the week of the 8th is already scheduled, that's fine. If the GM can have it sometime before Christmas, you know, earlier is fine, you know.
February 22nd seemed to be a little bit.
Yeah, that's Friday, that's a Friday.
Well, it's also right up against Christmas Day, which is Monday, and people are not gonna be around possibly, so maybe the week before would make more sense.
The week before, if you can get it done, yeah. And again, it's the first draft that's come about, all right? And, it also gives us a week or two to go through details at a time. Okay.
When does the assessments roll out?
What's that?
What's the date the assessments are due to be mailed out?
March, March.
Because I think that should be in that timeline too.
I have no idea what that is. I mean, so once the budget's approved, the assessments get mailed out
Yeah, it's been
right
consistent.
afterwards.
Once the budget approval process is, what, the end of February?
Right, it's got to be finalized by the end of February,
Sometime
so
after that.
sometime in March.
Just have one more item to add, or at least discuss, or whatever. We're running a deficit for the year. Ran deficit prior year. Is anybody going to take that into account for this budget process, or are we just going to hang it up on a balance sheet somewhere, or are we going to just like let it, what is being done for that? What is being recommended on that? What's being discussed?
I actually have a question for the committee, because this kind of jumps as an obvious, that the committee doesn't have a standalone recommendation really for how should the board deal with last year's deficit.
And this year's.
Well, yeah.
Right. And just
363,000
I
this
just say
year.
350 and whatever it's not, so, those are big numbers. There definitely needs to be something discussed, or something coming out of this budget process on it. It's my opinion. And the reason I'm saying that is, and I know Pat, I've been talking, we're looking at the cash position. We're looking, and I'm not saying we don't have cash, we have cash, we have whatever. That also should be a part of the budget process, where somehow, some type of mechanics to get some type of idea of what we believe our cash would be on a month-to-month basis. It can be done as part of the process. It doesn't have to be exact, but it would still be better than where we're at right now, where we don't know. But based upon all that and those numbers, I really believe, it sounds like maybe you are talking about it, this loss needs to be addressed. It really does.
That's one of the things I had on my list too, is we
Can't be
need
pushed
some
off.
recommendations, and it's gonna have to be, well, there's no way we're gonna make that up with everything else in a single year. So it's gonna be
Big stage.
very similar to stage, but I think, my personal opinion is Budget and Finance ought to take a look at this and come back to us with what do you think a reasonable plan is going forward here. So
Are you projecting the loss to be what by the end of the year? Actual bottom line loss?
The budget?
Not the budget, no, bottom line loss.
At year-end.
No, not the budget, I don't care, we put the comparison to the budget, what's the actual, are we gonna have a loss at the end of the year?
Yes.
Actual
Yes.
dollars?
Yes,
Income minus
yes.
outgo.
What's the projected loss? Pat, do you know?
I don't know.
I was
What is
fooling
it
around
now?
some, I was fooling around with some numbers, and it was
What is it now?
850 to
Come on.
900. 850
That was
to
the
900.
budget.
No,
I
that
think
was,
you're looking
no,
at
that was
1.1
bottom
plus or
line.
minus, probably, maybe a million.
That's the budget. I think maybe nine.
Yeah, but before we start throwing out guesses, all right,
Well, you're
let's,
gonna have
let's,
$1 million if you take 9 plus 3 from last year. So you're into 1.1 to 1.2 is,
you know, before we start stating numbers, those are nothing more than, as far as I'm concerned, guesses at this
Right.
point. And until it's backed up by fact
Right.
and financial analysis, then it's pure conjecture on my part.
Well, I tell you what, I mean, what we know, excuse me, John, what we know is what the deficit from last year. So what I would like to see, the committee and this board, actually at least come up with a plan to address the last year's deficit of $363,000 in the coming budget.
Oh, and I think you can take it a step further, so
That's
I'm
a
gonna say,
minimum.
assuming we are gonna lose some money in this fiscal year as well, I think we should,
But at the
be
minimum,
open.
saying is let's set the baseline at
Right.
Yeah,
least.
at the very least.
Yeah.
Right, and that's all I was saying. I wasn't saying somebody else was asking me about a number, I was putting a number on there, I didn't want to put a number on there. I'm just saying it needs to be addressed. You shouldn't walk out of this process without addressing it.
I agree.
That's all I'm saying.
I agree in concept, I just, you know, as people hear numbers coming out of this particular
I
meeting,
didn't
I
give a
suspect
number.
there'll
I didn't give a
be a few
number.
emails to the board.
Well, that's right.
You know, and I'm just, that's all I wanted to address.
And I agree with it.
We also, the answer to the question, like, you have three options.
That's right.
You have three options on the deficit, all right, on your loss. Add it to the next year's assessment. Take it out of reserves.
Right. 5 years.
Or make a damn profit next year to offset.
There you go, I like that one.
And that's your three options. That's the only three options you have, or any combination thereof. A loss is a loss.
what's the fourth option? I thought maybe cutting the expenditure.
Make
The
a
expenses.
profit.
That's how you make a profit.
There may not be
Well,
enough
then, I
profit.
mean,
Well,
if you cut expenses, then
All I'm
next
asking
year
is
to
that it
fund
be
it,
addressed, some type of plan start to be a part of the
that's no
process.
different than funding with.
You want policy, just how do you do the
yeah.
Oh, possibly.
Yeah, well, I think it's important because if we're gonna have the department start working on this, this coming couple of months, and they have to have really a target.
But like if nothing else, this past year should have at least made clear that during the course of the year, if you are so off on your revenue projections, somebody better start addressing the costs associated with that revenue, all right? All right, that's when you can't continue to expend money on something when you don't have the revenues coming in, all right?
Whatever the plan is in the end, we need to identify that dollar amount in the budget, okay? Because that's a dollar amount that is based on history, not on where we're headed forward, okay? That's a payback. And I think the other, just to do that, when we look at a capital plan, we need to look at what part of the capital plan is new capital and what part is legitimately replacement reserves. So if we decide we're building a new building that never existed before, that's new capital. If we're fixing and upgrading something that's there, that can be replacement reserves and or a combination of replacement reserves and new capital. So we need to look at that as we go forward on that. And that means we also need the reserve group to, at some point here, come back with some recommendations. And those may also, because of everything else that's going on, have to be phased in over a period of years. So whether you set a target of a dollar amount or a percent amount or whatever you do, it doesn't mean you can capture that in a single fiscal year. It may be a period of time. So, we shouldn't look at it as, hey, we're gonna take a huge bite immediately. We just have to have a plan for once that says, here's how we're getting it.
Exactly what I'm saying.
Are you saying that we're actually gonna have a loss at the end of the year from total revenue versus total expenses?
Doug just told us not
Not the
to.
budget, but the actual.
Doug just
We
said
did
the
last
first
year.
that he didn't want to get
Last year,
We did last year, that's concrete, we did 350.
360 or something.
It's probably a reasonable assumption, but again, TBD at this point.
Okay, but, because I know expenses have gone up, I mean, we're offering more services to the public. I know Parks and Rec, as an example, they keep adding to the services they provide, and that's fine, and you've got to recognize that it comes at a cost.
Unfortunately, I've got a hard stop, I've got a conference call on my real life job at 3:30 here, so I've got to, unfortunately have to leave. Our but unless we, is there any other questions before we want to make sure that we're,
I don't have anything else.
Gene, you had your hand up for one more?
Just a quick question. If we're gonna do an ROI on capital, request,
Mhm.
and we're a nonprofit, where do we expect the return to come from?
There's some value to it, you know, I mean, like if you're gonna,
Evaluation.
if you're gonna build a new tennis court, are you anticipating some revenue from tennis stuff to offset it? Well, you know, some value has to be put on it, you know, we needed the bathroom presumably. All right.
I don't know if it's profit.
What?
That makes it profit.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, maybe a cost benefit analysis would be.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
And
the
we've
cost
done that, we did
benefit
that
is
last
really,
year with the scissor lift.
All right. John, anything else from the rest of the colleagues?
No, but if
Budget
the
advisors?
board, if the board has anything that they would wish this committee to be doing specifically, you know, just let us know to our
Yeah.
liaison.
I think We'll probably have a discussion amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
Some of what we discussed today will probably be
Yeah.
a formal, ask from you guys.
You generally are sitting here with a lot of talent in finance and accounting.
Generally.
Well, there are exceptions, Gene, that's all right. But yeah,
I've learned to understand these.
the whole purpose of the committee is to be your sounding board for financial areas. And your idea about using committees is a good one.
Okay, well, let's everybody, thanks very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Call for adjournment. Thank you.
Fine.